Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kaylee. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First. We are one of just a few feminist bookstores left, and we're so thankful that you're spending some of your post-long weekend Tuesday with us to celebrate historical romance. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with the land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the event where you are viewing tonight's event, the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. In just a few moments, I will introduce our panelists. But first, just some housekeeping things. If you'd like to ask a question, there's a lovely ask a question box at the bottom of the screen. So you can put questions there and they won't go away with the chat. Of course, you're welcome to do stuff in the chat as well. But just know that that's there. There's also a Buy the Book button that will link to the Women and Children First website, which will have links to Caribbean Heiress in Paris, as well as other books from our authors tonight. We ship nationwide. We do contactless pickup. We're open in store, all of those good things. The event will run about an hour, and this panel is part of the kickoff launch for our new romance subscription box, which is where we send out a very fun box full of our favorite new release romance titles, along with other surprises and exclusive WCF merch every other month. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed already, and then we will be reopening subscriptions later this year. So keep an eye out for that on our newsletter. Nothing like, preparing to give yourself gifts in the future. Now for our introductions. Jen Prokop's lifelong romance habit began in 7th grade when she found a bag of remaindered romance novels in her grandmother's basement. Jen is co-host of the Fated Mates podcast, is a freelance romance editor, and reviews for Crowdcast. Joanna Shupe is a USA Today bestselling author. Shupe has always loved history ever since she saw her first Schoolhouse Rock cartoon. Since 2015, her books have appeared on numerous yearly best of events, including Publishers Weekly, The Washington Post, and Kirkus Reviews. She currently lives in New Jersey with her 2 spirited daughters and dashing husband. Harper St. was raised in the rural backwoods of Alabama and along the tranquil coast of Northwest Florida. It was a setting filled with the stories of the old days that instilled in her a love of history, romance, and adventure. By high school, she discovered the historical romance novel, which combined all of those elements in one perfect package. She has been hooked ever since. She lives in the Atlanta area with her family. And Adriana Herrera was born and raised in the Caribbean, but for the last 15 years has let her job and her spouse take her all over the world. She loves writing stories about people who look and sound like her people, getting unapologetic, happy endings. Thank you all for joining us. We're so thrilled to have this panel today.
Hi, everybody. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with an icebreaker question that you can all answer in the chat. If you haven't yet said where you're from, we would love to hear from you. And so, please tell us that. Oh, shoot. Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was like, something just happened. Okay, good. Because I was like, wait, something just happened to my screen. So what I would love for you to do, everybody, is say where you're from. And then here's the icebreaker question. And we're going to start with Adriana, and then we'll go to Harper and Joanna. And then everyone in the audience can also answer, which is, okay, your smartphone is about to die. You can only keep 3 apps on your phone. Everything else has to go. What 3 apps are you going to keep, Adriana?
For sure, my Kindle app, because that is necessary for life. Sorry, my dog just forcibly entered the room. My Kindle app, Probably like I love to watch like videos of recipes, so the Tasty app. and likely I mean right now I must admit that like I'm doing a lot of like impulse shopping, so probably some kind of online retail.
Retail therapy at the end of the world.
Yes, and if you see my dog, she's trying to get comfortable there in the background.
That's amazing.
She's like fighting a cushion.
I love it. Okay, Harper, what about you? What 3 apps are you going to keep?
Let's see. This is tough. Definitely the Kindle app. That was a good one because I do like to read. I just have it. You have a book with you all the time.
Yeah.
The Photos app because I'm constantly taking photos of my kids. What's another one? Probably just the Messenger app because I like to text my friends a lot, and you know I would need the record of everything that's there for blackmail in the future.
Yeah. Well, and how else do you remember things, right? All right, Joanna, what about you?
I feel like I have 1,000 questions. Like, am I stranded somewhere? Is this like, am I lost? Like, but I think I'm trying to like, I'm like digging too deep into what.
Just, yeah. Listen, you have 24 hours with only 3 apps on your phone. You are not at death's door.
Okay.
Enough food. Okay.
All right. So definitely like audiobook app, Kindle app, and I don't know. I'm trying to think of the other ones I use the most. Instagram, probably, sadly.
Someone said the Calm app. That's smart. You just
that's a good one.
Together, right?
Yeah.
That's like my inspirational self. Like what myself that I aspire to be would have the Calm app in their island.
Yeah. But the real you has the
somebody
app.
said Spotify. That's that would probably be Spotify and audiobook and
Hoopla. Now that I thought after you said audio, I was like Hoopla would be my also one.
I mean, and all of us are like some kind of probably 2 book apps out of 3 for sure, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think everyone in the audience obviously knows who you all are, but I would still love for you to hear like tell the audience about your latest book, but here is like the trick. I want you to pretend that you're at a cocktail party and you're meeting someone who you think is like open to reading a romance. So I want you to sell like a non-romance reader. Like, how would you sell your book to a non-romance reader? That's what I want to hear. Harper, let's start with you.
I feel like that's most of the people that I talk to about my book.
All right.
And I'm not very good at selling them. So my current series is The Gilded Age Heiresses, and it's sort of based on back in the Gilded Age, the late 1800s. There were American heiresses who were new money families. Their families had made their monies in the railroads and industry and things like that, but they were not allowed into high society, particularly in New York, but really a lot of places. And so their parents would marry their daughters off to European aristocracy, a lot from England. Well, that's where my books are set. And so they were called cash for class marriages. And you could suddenly have a duke in your family, and who's going to exclude you from their ballroom or their fancy party if you're bringing a duke with you? So that's what my series is about. And my latest book, The Lady Tints and Air, it came out in February. It's the 3rd book in the series, and it's about the son who inherited the family business. And so he's the American, and he's in England trying to avoid the marriage maneuverings of his parents. So.
Nice. All right. Adriana, what about you?
Well, if I feel like it depends on what kind of cocktail party. Because if I'm at a cocktail party with Dominican people, all I have to say is it's a book about Dominican people. So we don't have that many, and that's a strong selling point. But if I'm just like a general audience, I probably start with like the trivia that it was interesting to me. So I'd probably say like it's a historical romance, and it's set in 1889 Paris World's Fair, where there were like a bunch of countries, including the Dominican Republic. And I'd probably give them the little like story about how King Leopold gave the Dominican Republic the cut direct because we owed him money at the World's Fair. And so like that might be
the list of all the kings, though. So
I know they really were like in the top 3 most terrible. And that's like a low bar.
A low bar.
Yeah. I'd probably also maybe kind of go in with the distillery piece and like say that like, but you know, the heroine's a rum distiller and the hero's whiskey distiller, and I kind of like go into like the history of distilling and things like that, and the business of distilling, which might be or there's making out of the Eiffel Tower. Like I can read the room and know what like pieces of information probably, but all of those things are in it.
All those things are in it. Okay, Joanna, tell us about your latest.
So if I had to sell someone to read it, I would say, are you watching Julian Fellows's The Gilded Age, but those fade to black moments like really made you angry? I've got you covered. There are no fade. So like The Gilded Age, but make it bang is probably how I would sell it to anyone and everyone. The Bride Goes Rogue is book 3 in the Fifth Avenue Rebels series, and it is, enemies to lovers. They were betrothed, or so she thought, but he has no intention of marrying her. And so the concept for the book was basically Gilded Age girls gone wild. Like, what do you do now that, you have sat on the shelf for a year thinking you're engaged, but you're really not, and now you want to go crazy. So
one of the things that's really interesting is you 3 write. I mean, historical romance is so kind of wedded to like the Regency that for all intents and purposes, you 3 really are writing unusual historicals. So one question I have for you is, what is something a reader or a reviewer has told you is like historically inaccurate, but they were wrong? This is your chance to write that misconception, because I know that happens. Joanna, do you have one?
I mean, I actually stumbled across somebody saying that the French ball scene in The Bride Goes Rogue was so historically inaccurate for the Victorian time period that they couldn't finish. The book was a DNF. And I was like, okay, then you probably didn't read the author's note where I explained that ball actually took place. And I am pretty sure it's actually more risque than I even put in the book. So people just think that sort of those upper class morals that we've all been shown on TV and movies, that was everybody. And that, it's just this kind of sweeping generalization that of what morals and stuff were. It's such a long list. Yeah. I'm not answering this very well, but that's just one example.
Yeah. So like essentially like really an event that you researched extensively, they're like, that didn't happen that way.
Yeah.
Adriana, what about you?
I mean, one of the things that I got right off the bat was like, well, I mean, could it really be possible for a woman from the Dominican Republic to just be able to like be in Paris in 1889? I was like, surely, since the ship started going out of the Dominican Republic with sugar and gold since like 1493, surely between 1493 and 1889, a few Dominican people made it on the ship. over to Paris. So that piece of it is, I think, like people, and it's just because of like such a like lack of representation of us in those time periods that people just don't have, like they're not able to envision us in those rooms. But like specifically with this, like again with this book, like I had all this information about like all these Latin countries being like invited by France to be present. So that, but I think part of it too is like that piece that Joanna was saying, like people just don't have the ability to grasp that people were like sexual and that there were like all these like things that were risque, and like sex itself was entertainment, which is partly why I chose Paris as a setting, because everybody was doing everything in Paris in the late 1800s. Like lesbians were having the best time they've ever had between 1880 and 1900. And it was like such like literally like it was called the Belle Epoque. Like people were literally like living their best lives. And that piece I think is just, again, because Paris I think is not also a usual setting for historical romance. Like that's something that I've gotten a lot from readers. Like this is such an unusual setting. And I'm like, it's funny because everybody from England was going over there because they could just like go do whatever.
Right.
And so like I think that's also like a piece of it. Like again, like I think historical romance gets like so much of it is in a specific time period, and people think like it's crazy to imagine that people wouldn't think there's change between like 1817, since like Pride and Prejudice was set, and like the Regency, and like 1889. That's like 70 years. Like we are not behaving like we were in the 50s, and it's the same exact time between 1817 and 1889.
Well,
so I think
certain people would like us to behave like they thought we did in the 50s, but we're going to go ahead and say no to that, aren't we, everybody?
Yes. But anyway, I think it's part of that. Like just like people think everything is the same.
Right. Harper, what about you? Have you ever had to deal with this?
Yeah, definitely. Pretty much similar as both Adriana and Joanna. Like someone said clitoris, that didn't seem like it was a word that would have been used, at that time. And I'm like, well, we've had them forever. The word was coined, I think, around the 1500s. So it hadn't been discovered by then. People knew about it.
Right.
The same with like contraceptives, like there were cervical caps then. There were ads in newspapers for these things. So it was just, I think people think Victorian and they think that really wide middle class social mores that was only just really getting started then. It didn't really exist for like the people on the lower scale and the people in the upper classes as well. So I think what we think of now is the big middle class morality that came about after like the 1870s, when that really started to be pushed with politics and censorship and all that happened afterward. But really, it would go back to that. I don't know, Joanna, if this is the ball that you were talking about, but there was the French ball at the Academy of Music, and it was this really wild and crazy place. And you read people writing about it, and women were topless, and people were like pushing these women up to the balcony, and it was just a wild, almost like Mardi Gras environment, what you would think now, but it existed then.
Yeah. Okay, so we had a fun suggestion, and I am going to explain, if you are not on TikTok, like he's a 10 or like the book's a 10. Do you guys know this game? So let me explain it. And then I will also, by the way, if you have suggestions, you could put them in the chat and we use them. So for example, you could say like, he's a 10. So like the guy in this book is like perfect in every way, but the book is a slow burn, right? So then you get this other information, and then people give a new ranking, right? So if it was me, I'd be like, he's a 10, but it's a slow burn. I'd be like, now it's a 2, right? So essentially the second piece of information guides you can re-rank up or down, by the way. You can do it for any character or just like the book itself. So I have a couple that I was just going to do that I thought would be funny. I would probably just make them up. And then if anybody in the chat would like to suggest we do some, that would be great. Okay. My cat's going to join us, everybody. So she wants to play. Okay. So, he's a 5, but he has an evil twin brother. Anybody? You can play in the chat too, everybody.
Are we supposed to guess who this is? Or
no, you're just saying okay, so this main character is a 5, but he has an evil twin brother. What's his new ranking? That's all you're doing. These are not from real books. I'm making them up.
10.
Yeah. But I feel like, is it the 10 for him or for the brother?
Probably the brother.
Brother's a 10. Yeah.
That makes he's still a 5, but brother's 10.
Adriana knows me so well.
Adriana gets it. Exactly. There you go. All right. Okay. The book is a 6, but then there is a scene at like a bacchanal.
Oh, that would bring it up in the rankings for like 9.
9. Okay.
Depending how long the bacchanal hosts and who's allowed to come.
Oh, okay.
I mean, in the literal and figurative sense.
Nice. Okay. Anybody else? The book was a 6, but then there was a bacchanal. What's the book now?
I mean, 9, 10, 11.
10.
Yeah.
It could also go up to 11 depending what the situation is.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I love a bacchanal.
I mean,
Same.
Who doesn't? Okay. All right. The hero is a 7, but then he takes her to the modiste for a new set of clothes.
Oh, that's
2.
2.
I'm bored.
Okay.
Move along. Move along.
You don't like
what?
it? Okay.
What do they do in the
Fine.
dressing room? Or maybe like if it gets heated in the dressing room, that could go up.
Okay.
Like if the visit to the modiste is just like a ruse to like get more. Like,
in a historical though, does that happen in historicals? I feel like I see that a lot in like a contemporary, but
yeah, like a Pretty Woman moment where like he takes her shopping,
like sexy times in the dressing room in a historical. I don't know if I have seen. I don't know if I've seen that.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
we could close the shop down and then participate.
There you go. Sure. There you go.
Challenge accepted.
Sure. Okay. All right. The book is a 10, and then they have sex in a carriage. Okay, Harper, that's you.
Oh, that would be a 15.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
Yep.
Fair.
Sex in old timey moving vehicles just hits different.
Yeah.
It does.
Joanna, when you were on Fated Mates, you did a bunch of research on this, right?
I did.
Maybe be our segue back to historical talk.
I did because I knew I was going to get dinged if I wrote a full-on sex scene in a carriage. I knew I was going to get dinged by somebody saying that it couldn't happen, and so I really dug down the rabbit hole of videos online that are not safe for work, and I found some, and they made it work. So I felt justified in writing those carriage sex scenes.
Yeah.
Things we do for our books.
I mean, what else are you going to do, right? Okay, he's a 10, but he's a dangerous criminal kingpin who curses like a sailor.
Oh,
I think we lost Jen.
Yeah.
Oh, are I lost?
Oh,
yeah, we lost.
Okay,
lost it for a minute, but Melissa's is cashmere.
Yeah, I was reading that one. That's okay. That is Joanna's book, The Devil of Downtown. Downtown.
Yeah, you can go downtown.
Okay. All right. So one of the questions that I really love to ask is, and this could be something you've done in the past or something maybe you're doing for a book you're planning to write, which is, What is like something wild that you've had to research for one of your books or that you are currently researching?
Like wild, what category of wild?
Well, it could be like you never thought you just went down some sort of research path you didn't expect. It doesn't have to be like super sexy. It can be, but just like I found or discovered something it surprised even you. Yeah.
I don't know that I found anything like that. I go to newspapers.com a lot, and just if I'm researching something, I'll look at the other articles around. And there was one where there was no other information. It was just a little clip, and it was a legal notice where somebody was looking for a woman who had disappeared because she'd hired a guide to take her across the country, and they'd wound up in New York. $5,000 she paid him, which was in the 1880s. So I don't know. That seemed a little high to me. Anyway, she disappeared, he went to get the sheriff or the chief of police or somebody to help him get her to pay up. And when they got to her room, she had disappeared. And they opened the safe in the room and found a pile of birdseed that she had left there.
Oh, wow. So she was just like a scammer, right? It sounds like.
Yes, pretty much. So now I have to write that into a book. But I'm just always getting sidetracked into all of these, rabbit holes that have nothing to do with what I'm researching, but just craziness with people who lived back then, and they do the same crazy things people do now.
Of course.
I think for this, I think for me, it's been just really fun just finding all this like presence of Latin people in Paris. But I read this book called like Public Sex, and it was about like in Paris, basically like all like during the Second Empire and like all in the Belle Epoque, like basically like prostitution wasn't illegal, like sex work wasn't illegal. You just had to like openly, show that you were like a house where sex was the commerce, and also women having sex with women wasn't illegal. Men having sex with men was. So there was like a really, really like robust nightlife for lesbians in Paris at that time. So it's just been interesting to read how, there was like a whole club scene or like bar scene up in Montmartre, which was all women who came to look for other women. And it was all legal and not really like unacceptable. Like, I think there was like women from like super high society, like they probably couldn't get away with like being that up there all the time. But it was just, again, like fascinating to see just how openly and just how just normal it was for these women to be able to like go into these bars. And we have this perception that sex work and like people who were our LGBTQ like were always in the shadows, right? And it really wasn't like that, at least not in Paris. Like, of course, like there were issues, of course, but I think it's just different than the perception that we have. And I think it's because the people that have been able to kind of like tell those stories.
Yeah. Joanna, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm always, I feel like every book I've written is based on some little historical nugget that either somebody told me or that I discovered. I mean, the French ball was the whole reason I wrote The Bride Goes Rogue. And then rewrote it 3 times, but always keeping the French ball like that. I mean, no matter how many times I rewrote that story, the French ball was always the focal point. So, yeah.
Do you mostly do internet research? I mean, Adriana mentioned a book. I mean, it feels like, like Harper's like just sort of reading around, reading newspapers.com kind of around the thing you're looking for. Are there any other like?
These are like 2. I mean, I have tons and tons and tons of.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm always like looking in the Gangs of New York and Low Life. Those are the 2 that I use probably the most for research. I just got tons of research books on my desk.
Okay.
Yeah, same. A lot of books. And I also like the National Archive. Like, I got really lucky because there's a Dominican Studies Institute in the City College of New York, and the librarian there was super helpful, helping me find information just about the DR at that time. And then the French like National Archives are like digitized and amazing. And the French, specifically for this story, like the French really wanted to like stick it to like all the European countries that declined to come to the World's Fair because it was celebrating the centennial of like when they like chopped the heads off of a bunch of monarchs. So like all of the countries with monarchs said no, including England. The presence of England at that fair was private businessmen that came together and like paid for their presence there. So the French documented everything. Like there were volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes of like books and tourist guides produced in 1889 just to like document how they really threw the best party that had ever been thrown, and like the British, the Italian, the Germans, the Austrians just like didn't come.
Too bad for them. Well, and so you were researching in both French and Spanish, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we have a couple questions in the chat, which are kind of interesting. So one is from Vanessa, which is, since you're doing all this research into these eras, are there topics or settings that you are still wanting to explore in your era? Or like, so Harper, or, so Harper, like, are there Gilded Age things that you still want to explore?
I guess the main thing would be I would love to write more in San Francisco. There was a lot going on out there. Just different cities that aren't necessarily the ones you see all the time in romance. I feel like we get a lot of London and a lot of, well, some New York, not even a lot of New York. Right. But San Francisco was a really interesting place. So definitely there. I think it would just be the places, because you have all these interesting people all over the world, really.
Yeah. Adriana, what about you? Things in the, especially since this is the first of your series, right? So are there,
I'd like to probably stay in Paris, because just in terms of the people I write about, Paris is really kind of like the most like viable setting in Europe. But I'd like to like move like a few, like I'd love to write during like the like Art Nouveau period, where like Sarah Bernhardt was like in Paris, like, and it's like a like more Edwardian, so it's more like late 1890s, like right before the First World War. Like that was like a really interesting time in the world, and specifically in Paris, and also in Latin America. Like a lot of things were happening politically. Like Latin America was just becoming a lot more important, like geopolitically, and so there was like a lot of movement of people from Latin America to Paris. So that would be kind of like a time period. There's like a 15 to 20 year period that is like super like vibrant for Latin America. So that would be a time that I'd like to write. But I probably, if I stay in Europe, I probably stay in Paris, unless I find something like super fascinating that some Latin person did in like London or something.
Yeah. Okay. Joanna, what about you? You love writing in New York. Are there other places you want to write about?
I know, how many stones? I keep thinking there are no more stones to be unturned, but then I keep finding more. The one thing about the Gilded Age that I really wanted to tackle, but didn't have the right book, the right characters of the right book to do it, was the whole contraceptive abortion issue. And The Duke Gets Even was the book to do it in. And so that entire book, that is the fourth book in the Rebels series that comes out at the end of January, that's the book that I finally got to do that in. So that for me was like very satisfying. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds.
Have any of you ever considered, this is another question from someone in the chat. Teresa wants to know, have you ever been interested in writing in a non-romance genre?
These days I'm really like interested in writing like a domestic thriller where like a lot of men die, but that's just, I think, the moment.
Would read.
Yeah, but no, I mean, honestly, like it's what I read widely, but romance is what I love to write. So I could, I guess, but there's so much other stuff that I want to write in romance that I feel like I haven't run out of ideas yet.
Yeah. Harper, what about you?
If I could kill a lot of men and also have banging, then I could do that.
Sure.
Erotic thriller, you could write that.
See, exactly.
Probably just historical fiction.
Okay.
Just because there are so many interesting people, families, the Vanderbilts. I'm obsessed with them right now. Just all the subsidiary people that sort of come off of them. They just have a very interesting stories, little nuggets that you find there. So maybe, I don't know that I could ever write without romance being involved though somehow, because that's sort of what grounded me. That's what I feel like historical romance is so great, because even for people who aren't necessarily into history, it gives you that, it grounds you, it gives you that part of the story you can hold on to while you learn about all these other things, where you're getting little history nuggets fed to you.
Right.
So, I could do historical fiction, but I might do it, but it would definitely still have a little bit of a romance in there, just because I love the escapism of that too.
Yeah.
So.
Not for me. Hard pass.
Yeah. Romance forever.
Yeah. I was gonna say, Harper, that we just last week we went to Poughkeepsie to go see the Vanderbilt mansion, and there's Frederick Vanderbilt, which was like the third grandson of the Commodore,
right?
And it was like the simplest. He was the most humble of them, and it was like. Like you go in and there's like a Medici tapestry, like right at the entrance.
And that wasn't even his main house.
No, that was just like the house that it was just like them and a few friends would come a couple times a year.
Yeah, like in the winter and the summer.
Yeah.
So, thinking about your book that just came out, your most recent book, was there a scene that you thought was particularly difficult to write? And then if so, like kind of why, or how did you write yourself out of it or through it?
I feel like that book was hard throughout.
Like all of the above.
Yeah. There's a scene at the end of the book, and it's kind of a spoiler, but like the hero has been working with like, someone that like is important to him to kind of like get revenge from his dad, and it's like a really intense moment, and he kind of like says all these hard truths to his dad, and that one was hard because I didn't want it to be too much, but I also wanted it to have the impact, like, so it was like that one I feel like I had to rewrite a lot of times just because I could have like really gone overboard and made it super like heavy. And it was supposed to be a heavy moment, but not so heavy that like the next scene where there's like a super hot sex scene was going to be like impacted. So it was hard finding a balance for that moment too.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Joanna? For me, it was probably the opening to The Bride Goes Rogue. I wrote that many, many, many times because it's really the catalyst for the whole story. It's what sets everything in motion. And, you can't walk away hating either of them. So that was a tricky. Some readers probably think I didn't pull it off, but but you can't hate the hero, at the end of the scene. So it's kind of that's a hard line.
That's really interesting. So, okay, I want to hear from Harper, but then I have a follow-up question.
Okay. So the Lady Tempson Heir, it's a fake engagement, fake courtship situation. So they're both being sort of pressured to get married, and they decide, well, we'll just pretend to be engaged until you go back home to America, and I'll stay here, and then we'll call everything off. But of course, as they see each other more and they go through the motions of being engaged, they really do start to fall in love. And the heroine had been married before, so she knew she was not able to have children. And that conversation, because it was a really emotional conversation and I had to really be very respectful of both of their feelings, it was really difficult to write, because she's telling him, hey, this isn't going to work out because I know you do want children and I can't give them to you. So you really want the reaction to be genuine and not just like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, because, that's something you have to process and get through to acceptance. So it was just really, it took me forever, and I kept going back and rewriting it and crying because you're feeling everything that your characters are feeling. So it was just a really draining scene to write.
So one of the things that leads me to think is, like, how much of a hard scene is because, like, the voice of the reader is in your head? You're just all nodding, sadly.
Yeah.
Well, for me, at some point it goes away when I'm writing. And
well, that too. I think, yeah.
It's there when you start, and then I tend to write in kind of chunks. And so then I stop after I do like 3 or 4 chapters, and I always have to edit those chapters, and then I move ahead another 3 or 4. So it's every time I'm going back in there, I have to get back into the story. And at some point it sucks me in and I can go on without thinking about that too much, but it can't be there.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the piece that I write, like I write linear, right? So I don't go back. I just keep writing, but I get I get my footing for like actually getting in the character's head, like kind of late in the process. Like it's usually once I'm like in copy edits, I'm like, I know exactly what he's going to say here. So let me just add these 15,000 words when like this is literally the last pass. But and Jen knows this because there were many a phone call of like desperation during my writing process of Heiress that Jen supported me through. But yeah, for me, I think it's that piece that I am much more thinking about what the reader, because I'm unsure. Like I don't have like a handle on the character. So I think like it's easier to go like with like what I think this should sound like. But then once I'm further into the writing process and I'm really like, I know what that character would say instinctually, then the voice, like that stuff kind of gets tuned out. And like, I know exactly what that should sound like or what the tone is. So yes and no.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I know what my weaknesses are as a writer. That I know that I like an asshole hero and I'm willing to, what can I say? So I'm willing to forgive. I have a very, I have a big tolerance, I guess, for the hero's shenanigans. I'm willing to forgive a lot. And not a lot of readers are. So that I know is a weakness. And so, the grovel is also a weakness for me because I'm just like, whatever he says, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know, you're sorry. You really mean it. So like, I always have to go the extra mile to do an extra grovel because like in my mind, we're square, but it never works out kind of like that for the reader. So that's sort of always in my head.
Yeah. Okay, there's some really great questions in the chat. So from Cecilia, what are your favorite and least favorite titles of your books?
I'm terrible at titles, so I feel like any ones that I came up with are probably bad. We just had a big go back and forth with the title for the second Leona's book, and we just came to it, and it had to grow on me because it wasn't my first choice, but now it's kind of growing on me. So I I hope it's good, but it wasn't my first choice, so I'm warming up to it still.
Okay, fair. Okay, Harper, what about you?
I'm terrible with titles too. So my favorite title I came up with is The Devil and the Heiress. I just like the way it sounds.
That's a great title.
It is a great title.
But the others, I'm just like, I don't know until people tell me if it's good or not. So
I love The Devil in a title.
Every year at Halloween, I tell Sarah that we are going to do, okay, spoiler alert, because it's going to happen this year. I was like, every year, I was like, at Halloween, we're going to do a episode that's just heroes named Devil.
I love The Devil. And they're especially good in historical.
Yeah, they are. They're the best in historicals.
Yeah. Oh, the title is An Island Princess Starts a Scandal. Is the title of the second book.
I love it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Love that you got Island Princess in there. That's nice.
Island Princess, right? A Caribbean heiress. Right?
Yeah.
Because you can't call it a dumbass man. That's a woman he doesn't deserve. That should be the subtitle of every MF romance should be a dumbass man gets a woman he doesn't deserve. Right? Okay.
Yes. True.
Everyone, there's now you all know my stance. Joanna, what about you? Do you have a title that you love or hate?
All my titles are my own. I came up with all of them. So if you hate any of them,
okay,
then you got nobody to blame but me. Although I feel like Sophie Jordan came up with The Lady Gets Lucky. I feel like that was hers. So she sort of gets the credit for that.
Yeah.
But The Rogue of Fifth Avenue is probably my favorite.
Yeah.
And then, the whole series just kind of spun off from that. So
all those titles for that series were solid.
Great. Yeah. Although
my all-time favorite, everybody knows it.
Devil of Downtown. Prince of Broadway. Amazing. That's a really fun question. That's a great question. I'm going to save that for later times I ask people questions. Okay. Kelly, my best friend, is here. She asked a question about abortion, which is, and I'm going to sort of phrase it a tiny little bit differently maybe than it is here, which is, she asked, do you think you'll write more abortion stories in books moving forward that would be more positive or affirming versus sort of the punishment evil way we've seen in romance in the past? And you don't have to answer it just for you if you don't want to. You can sort of maybe think, if it's easier, like, do we think romance is going to change the way we put abortion on page? Because we really typically haven't. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Especially with everything that's happening. And as I see a lot in the newspapers in the Victorian era, I mean, you could buy medicinals through the mail. I mean, it wasn't really, it was called I can't remember what it was called now, but it was always like the
quickening
ladies problem or something like that. It was, so it was really common. And I just think it would be accurate to add it more as we go forward, particularly as we're writing more in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure. Same. I think I already had, for this series specifically, I already thought it wasn't like the backstory in the third book would have something having to do with an abortion in the heroine's past. And I'm like gonna lean into it hard.
Yeah, the Duke Gets Even, the whole thing is about contraception, and the heroine, Nellie, does mention that she had an abortion, that there was a pregnancy that had a consequence that she dealt with alone and had no regrets, So, I mean, I think it's another way that, we as writers kind of normalize things and put our own sort of beliefs into what we're writing.
Yeah.
Okay. One last question as we wrap up, which is I asked at the top, like, how would you describe your book to like someone who, didn't read romance, but I think a lot of people like my age came to romance first through historical, like almost everybody I know. But it feels like now we have lots of younger readers who have never read a historical. So why should romance readers who are new to romance and maybe never read a historical before, why should you read a historical? What is special about this subgenre to you?
That's a good question. I don't know. For me, it's always been the heroes. I really love the strong, take control heroes. I guess alpha, you would call them, but I just really love the heroes in historical romance.
Yeah.
I think there's a level of fantasy with historical that perhaps you don't get in a contemporary as much. I mean, certainly there are to some level. I mean, you know, the billionaire that has nothing to do but like take you shopping and hang out with you and take you on trips and stuff is a complete and utter fantasy. But so yeah, I mean, escapism, fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, all those things. I think there's just an aesthetic to it that I find very satisfying. It's very delicious to me. Like, it's very indulgent. It's like an indulgent read, and it's completely separate from my own reality, which feels extra nice these days.
Yeah.
And I feel like, yes, the heroes, but I also always loved, and I came into romance reading historical, like, in my teens. I was also really obsessed with Edith Wharton, which was like kind of went hand in hand with the aesthetic. I feel like the aesthetic of like Edith Wharton's like oeuvre is very adjacent to like the aesthetic of like historical romance. And I just love that like type of like lush setting. But I also always thought like the like historical romance heroines are very active heroines, right? Like they are very they're go-getters. I feel like I get a lot more satisfaction with historical romance heroines lately. Like it's just like because of like all the rights that they didn't have, which it's sad to think about now. But anyway, like I feel like they were just like they had to be a lot more like self-aware about what they could not compromise on. And I just really love that. And like, of course, these heroes who like think they have it all together and they're like are like falling apart limb by limb by the end. It's just great.
I don't usually answer my own questions, but one of the things I tell people is I think authors get a lot of like pushback now, like don't be too political, right? But I think historical romance, especially now, can be unabashedly like completely political because these are things that have already happened, right? Like no one is going to be like, well, I don't know about the corn laws or whatever, right? So you can have people that are saying like, I want the world to be a better place. And, you know, because we look back on those people and think like, yeah, people made that change. They made that happen. And so I think that if you want to read about like political activism and romance now, you are far more likely to get it in a historical, which I think is telling and maybe not a good way. But I do think that there's a big part of historical romance that can be really like unashamedly like, I want the world to be a better place and I'm going to fight to make that happen, not just for me, but for lots of people. And I think that to me is something now that I find so appealing about historical romance. It feels like the stakes are really high.
Female friendships
just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I feel like that just blew my mind.
No, I do. I really believe that.
I think you're right.
Right?
Yeah. I think honestly, like womanhood, like female friendships, and they're just like it's heroines that just have such an awareness of what they have and what they don't have from the moment that they are on the page. That like it's like a fight to preserve what they have and like acquire more of the rights that they don't have. And so much of it has to do with like making this man fall apart.
And now that some of the rights, you know, the rights currently are being rolled back, it will be interesting to see in the next 5-10 years, whether those contemporaries have that same sort of, because right now they really don't. I mean, the stakes are something completely different. The plots are something completely different.
Yeah.
The only thing though is you lose the fantasy aspect if you're putting that in contemporary. You can put it in historical and still have that escapism.
Right. You can put it in contemporary and people can still wear pretty dresses, right?
Yeah.
But it feels like in contemporary, it's like if you make that choice, and I don't think it has to be that way, but I do think readers are like somehow, I just think it's really interesting the way that has changed, right? Like when I look back on old, when I first started reading romance, like 80s romance, it was like historicals were like old school and rapey, and it was like contemporaries that were really interesting. And I'm fascinated by the fact that this like switches happen. So anyway, I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we have a hard stop in 2 minutes. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for supporting Women and Children First, a local Chicago bookstore, to me. And it was really great to see so many people in the chat. I have one last like personal item of business, which is if you are worried about abortion rights in our country, Fated Mates is sponsoring a phone bank this Saturday. You can look on our Twitter or Instagram for details. We will be phone banking to Kansas, where we will be encouraging voters to vote no on a proposed amendment that would make abortion illegal in the state of Kansas. So if this is something you're worried about and you have felt like kind of stuck and there's nothing for you to do, you can get on your phone and no one will know it's your number. And we phone bank together and it's really fun. So look for information. Kelly just put the link in the chat. I promise you will have never had such a great time phone banking in your life. And it also feels like doing something. So I hate to like sweep that up at the end, but I know that you all support that. So join us Saturday and buy these terrific historical romances from these great authors. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen.
I love you all.
It was good to meet you.
It was.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jen, Harper, Joanna, Adriana, for joining us today. This was a lovely conversation. And thank you for supporting the bookstore. Also, yes, Illinois is going to be a really important place in the Midwest in the next couple of years. So the bookstore will be doing a fundraiser for Chicago Abortion Fund in the next couple of weeks that may or may not involve winning a date at the store. So keep an eye out for that. It should be really exciting. Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.